Okay, so welcome to a quick upgrade where we just, I'm not totally sure how long this lecture will be. I could imagine it's going to be one of the longest one. If we can, we'll keep it to one video. But the first thing I can see here is that I accidentally just parented my neck underneath my tail. So I'm just going to take that out so all my modules are fitting to the video. So we have the leg, spine, neck, tail. And what we're going to do now is just create the clavicles. Not all animals actually have clavicles. I think some cat animals actually have floating shoulder joints, but since this is a creature, we kind of decide on our own how we want to treat it. And what we're going to be doing is we'll be creating a simple joint chain of 3 joints, and I'm going to do just randomly place them here. Don't worry about too much. Actually, yeah, because I kind of want to rotate it from in here and rotate my shoulder upwards. So the first thing I'm going to do is just snap. I have my new created joint chain selected, and I'm just going to select that shoulder or that current arm joint and isolate the two. Select this one, make sure it's snapped to this guy. And the next thing I'm going to do is take this one and do the same. So right now I have 2 joints on top of each other. And actually I'm going to take the last one as well. So the first thing, now all the 3 joints are exactly on top of each other, and that's fine. So the next thing I'm going to do is unparent them, and then I'm going to take just one of them, since we're going to create a hierarchy here. So the first one I'm just going to take and pull up, and the other one I'm going to take and pull inwards. So I'm creating like sort of a triangle here, and I'm going to take this inner one and pull it down. So that's going to serve as my clavicle. Basically where what I'm trying to replicate is going to be how this shoulder is going to rotate around the rib cage. So no matter where I pull this controller that we're going to have here, this arm will constantly be rotating around the rib cage. That's basically what I'm trying to fake. So if I take this one now and pull this joint down a little bit, I'm going to select all of them actually, just make them a little bit bigger, so we can see what's going on. Let's just make them big. Pull this one up, and this will be fine for now. Something like this. Let's see. I'm gonna isolate them all. Shift H as we've done before. So I'm not totally sure how that actually managed to happen. But basically what I want to do is make sure that they're in the same line. So if I hold down V, it's not really snapping. Let me see what's going on here. So first off, I'm going to just zero out all of these bad rotations we have in here. And they just come from like my first placement, so you might not have those. And then second of all, I'm going to set it to world space. I'm going to go into the side view, and I know the middle one here is the one that's at the actual shoulder. So what I did here was that I hold down V, and then I hold down one axis, so I can only snap in that axis, and then it's going to snap to the same spot as this one. And now we kind of have this triangle here, and then I'm going to parent this one underneath here and this one underneath here, and let's call this. Let's check with our character where it is actually. So the idea is here that I want to, when I'm rotating this, that it's kind of rotating around my rib cage, and it's not really doing that for me yet. So I'm holding down D, which actually makes it possible for me to move my joint without moving the rest of the hierarchy. Because if you just move a joint, you can see the rest of the hierarchy moves. But if I hold down D, the hierarchy will stay. So I'm gonna see here. I think that's quite cool. So right now, this joint here is kind of rotating around that rib cage that would lie underneath here, and that's kind of what I want to fake. So you can see, like, I'm not in anywhere near where there maybe would be a clavicle here on a human being, for instance. But in order to fake this movement, we just need to make that rotation fit. And what we could have done is hold down D and just have it in the opposite way. That's quite typical as well. So if I hold down D and V, I can snap it to the actual opposite joint here. And then what you would do is just make sure that it rotated like this. We could do that. It's one way of doing it. I like to have it a little bit more centered. So if I do something like this, I can see that rotation. So let's go with this. You can go for this side over here if you feel like that's more accurate. Some companies will do that. And then the next thing we're gonna do here is just I think we're just gonna keep this for here just to make our joint orientation pretty simple. So let's do as we always do. We have our main axis as our, so what I did here was just hold down W and hold down left mouse click, and then if I hold both of those down I can see which orientation my joint is in, and I can see that it's an object now. If I go here set to world, it'll fit the world object, set to object again. So that's the same thing I'm going to do here. Okay, so I want X to be my rotation and set to be my, well, if I rotate this, I can't do that with this one, but if I rotate, let's try one that's free, maybe something that's constrained. So if my set is rotate, it should be going minus. So let's try and make that happen. So skeleton orient. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to put X in this direction, which it actually already is, and then we want to make set our rotator, and we want to have that in set's direction, and we want to have it in plus set. So let's try and do that. There you go. So now we aimed that, and then this one aims in to be the same. This is fine because we have X going upwards to the next, and we have set still being our rotator. So that's good. And then we just select the last joint as usual and orient that to the world joint. So that's basically a clavicle joint here, or fake clavicle. Let's call that L clavicle, and then AJ JNT, and let's call this one A clavicle AJA B, or we could call it end, but it doesn't really matter. We could actually also, let me call this L just to make it clear. Shoulder AJ JNT, and let's make this one L scapula AJ JNT, because it's gonna fake our scapular bone here. So the next thing I'm gonna do while I'm here is first of all mirror this joint chain, because we already oriented. We're gonna replace L with R, and we're gonna take the behavior. And then the next thing we're gonna do now is I'm gonna show you how to do both of them. If you want to do just one at a time, you can do that. So I'm gonna say skeleton IK handle, and I'm gonna change this to a single chain solver. So make sure that if yours is on rotate plane or any of the other solvers, that you go single chain. And then you select the first and the second joint. And we do this for the other side. I don't know why I didn't want to repeat that process. But then we have this one, which we call L, sorry, not scapula, but L shoulder IK. We can call that IKS, and our shoulder IKS. And then we're gonna create another one and another one, and this will be the R scapula IKS, and this will be the L scapula IKS. Great. So we need two controllers. We need one controller that can control this one, so we can move our scapula around, and we need another controller so that will move this one around. So we can use that translate button there. So let's quickly pick up a controller, and I think I kind of want to pick up a round one since we got so many squares in that area. So I just took this one in the back here. I'm just gonna snap that to this one in order to be able to see it. Just gonna isolate that for a second, and let's keep that rotation and translation. Actually, you know what? Let's take the feet because they're already oriented the way we want it. So if I select this controller now, unparent that and move it up to this one. There you go. And then let's clean up all the crap that's underneath here. So delete all this stuff instead of call that leg hind. And before we do that, I'm just gonna do both of them at the same time, really. So let's select this guy, duplicate it, unparent it, select the joint in front here, move that up there, delete everything underneath. And let's rename these two. So if we go modify, search and replace names, let's see, leg hind with shoulder, and shoulder with not a capital. Awesome. And then let's select the two. Yeah, let's select the two controllers here. Just gotta make sure we're in object, so we're in the local space of each of them. So since I'm manipulating the shape only, I don't really care too much about orientation. I just want to make sure that these shapes become somewhat logical to our animators. But since, as usual, I will change these controllers at some point to kind of look a little bit better and a little bit more intuitive to pick. But just for my sake right now, when I'm creating the rig, I just need something where I'm instantly sure what I'm picking on here. So, and I'll say like that's about now. So this will be fine. So that's gonna serve as my shoulder joint here. So what I'm gonna do now is that I'm gonna pick up this controller here, or this IK, and I'm gonna create an empty group, and I'm gonna parent that underneath my shoulder, and you can see that it's inheriting these translations and rotations. So I take that and then I zero that out, and then I unparent it again, which means that now it's in this position and holds the position of the IK. And I'm just gonna parent the IK underneath now. And then if I take this one and call this the IK orient group, and then select my controller here, select the IK orient group and constrain it, parent constraint. So this is pretty cool because now no matter where I move my controller, this will always rotate around that spot. That's why I don't, that's basically why I don't like just basic rotation, because if you just make a controller here, yes you can rotate, but it doesn't seem as intuitive as moving a controller around here. And besides that, in a second we're gonna hook up our legs to follow this, and then you'll see why it becomes really clever. So if I take this joint here now, which is our leg joint, our front leg joint, and just make sure that you take the AJA and not the IK, not the spring joint, just the regular joint. You can see if I push this one down, the leg is moving. And you would think that I would parent that to my controller, but that's not the point. The point is I'm gonna constrain it to my end joint here, because my shoulder joint, because my shoulder joint is determined to move only around the rib cage. So if I select this one now, and I say constrain, parent constrain, you'll see that no matter where I move this controller, my leg and my shoulder will always stay the same, and it will help each other rotate around the rib cage, which is super helpful. And it'll give like a very natural feel, you know, when you rotate your arm down, it's gonna naturally try and rotate and keep that length, because in real life your arm will obviously not stretch out. It will rotate around some sort of pivot, and that's what we just faked here. So I'm gonna do the same thing over here. So select the IK shoulder, sorry, make an empty group. So have nothing selected and hit Control G, parent that underneath your shoulder, minus out these positions. It doesn't matter with the rotation, we're not trying to orient the controller, we're just trying to find a group for it, and steal this name. So instead of calling that L, let's call that R, and then parent the shoulder underneath. And right before I'm going, I'm just gonna quickly hit save and call this for the clavicles. Let's call that part 1. Awesome. And then we're gonna take our controller. I'm gonna parent constrain my orient group. That's moving perfectly. And then I select my shoulder joint here. And then I pick up the front AJ here. And then I say constrain, parent constrain. So now when I move the controller, bam, it's moving around. That's really sweet. So something that is a little bit problematic here is that our clavicle would probably, in this case, if we actually had a clavicle here, would probably, as we move up here, the clavicle will probably move out a little bit. So we want to fake that movement, or not fake it, but we want to create some sort of controller that can keep it in place. So let's create like a little controller as well for that. So I'm just gonna select these two controllers and call them, instead of shoulder, let's call them scapula. Sorry, we need to remove shoulder, replace with scapula. Remove the duplicated names. So I think you have a pretty good idea by now how to move your controllers around. So I select my orient group, my joint, Alt H, select the orient group, snap that up there, Control Shift H to get out of that, and then I'm just gonna shape these two controllers. These two are really tweak controllers, so we might even create like an on-off switch for them later. But okay, so just had a quick interrupt there. Apparently my disk was full, so let's just continue with the shaping of these controllers. It'll be really simple stuff since it's just a tweak. But most of all, it's a placeholder for our scapulas. And you'll see why they're helpful in a second. So if I do exactly as I did before, create an empty group, and this time I'm just going to duplicate that empty group, parent 1 underneath so I parent null 1 underneath L and null 2 underneath R, open up the two, zero them out, then pull L under 1 and R under 2, and let's rename these quickly. So instead of calling them so let's make sure we get the right names for these. So if I call that scapula IKS orient group, and call this one for L. Oh, sorry, this is the L. So let's call that one for L. And let's call this one for R. Perfect. And then we constrain those two to these controllers. So L to L. Constraint, parent constraint. And here to R, parent constraint. So now you'll see when I move my controller around, the scapula is actually trying to compensate because it's now aiming for this guy. So now you have a little bit extra tweak control for your scapula if you want to go in and make that extra movement. If you want to, and we're not going to do that here because we are after all trying to make a pretty simple rig. But if you should want to, you can later on create an on-off switch for your scapula. So wherever you move this you can make sure that either this one moves with it or stays, so you can make a sort of on-off switch, just like we did for the eyes when we did the eye aim. Oh, by the way, controller here is not colored, but as we did for the eye aim, you can create an on-off switch. We will probably not have time for doing that in this course, because we're trying to do something simple. And let's make sure that we have everything reset here, because as you can see, I was wondering like why my controller is not on top here, but obviously I just had some movement here. And that translation down there, that movement is fine because we're dealing with springs. So don't worry if they don't fit here, that's okay. As long as your controllers are in the original position, you should be alright. Anyways, that's the upgrade of the scapula, or the rotation of the leg. I think, if I'm not remembering wrong, we quickly need to go in, and I think we didn't parent constrain the spring, so we just want to do that as well. So we just parent constrain the spring. So now the spring solver is moving with it as well, and we want to do the same thing for this one over here. So select the shoulder controller and select the spring chain. Make sure you get that parent constraint as well. The reason why I didn't do that immediately is because the spring solver has to be treated differently at the end when we parent stuff in, but we can for now do like this. Anyways, so that's it. That's the upgrade for the scapulas, and we're starting to get a rig that's starting to look very good, guys. I think next time we're gonna clean up some modules, and then we're getting really close. So let's quickly group all this stuff we just did and call that. Let's call that clavicle group. I call it clavicle group because it's basically controlling the clavicle, the shoulder, and the scapula, but its origin is in the clavicle, so that's why I'm going for that, if anybody should wonder. And let's call this tail group for tail geometry. So everything is, and this is not only the L, this is both sides, so let's just stick with that. So now we have all our modules here. And I'm gonna hit save. And if you made it this far, very good, guys. And I'll see you in the next lecture where we are gonna start putting things together, and that'll be really exciting because we're probably gonna be a fairly long lecture, about 45 minutes, I'm assuming. But when we've done with that, we basically have a whole functional rig. So really hang in there. You're getting closer. Also remember to go to the website of ManoAnim and sign up for the newsletter, so I can keep you guys up to date as soon as I make new lectures.